Got 20 seconds. Come on, man, to go.
Keep moving. Good. Get those knees up. Explode. Good. Explode. Let's go. Up.
Rock forward. Let's go. One more. Go.
You are listening to the Fight Strength Podcast with your hosts, Phil Daru and Jason Burgos.
Hello again, my fighting and fitness true believers. Welcome back to an all-new edition of the Fight Strength Podcast. I am Jason Burgos, contributing writer for SureDog.com. And as always, I am joined by the very bearded and tattooed strength and conditioning mastermind of American Top Team, the traveling man himself, Phil Daru. Philip, what is going on?
Listen, man, I want to give a shout out to you, Jason, for, increasing your stock. And now you are writing for ShareDog.com, and I'm very proud of you, sir.
Well,
I'm very proud of you.
I thank you, for being proud of me. I appreciate that. All right, so
I'm good, man.
On this week's edition, we are lucky to have on the director of strength and conditioning for the UFC Performance Institute, and that is the very talented Bo Sandoval. Phil, I know you have actually had a chance to visit the UFC PI. I mean, that's pretty damn cool. How did you originally get in contact with Bo, and then get him as a guest on our show?
I think I was in Vegas for International Fight Week. I think maybe 2 years ago. Or maybe a year and a half ago, something like that. And I contacted them. I was like, I think I contacted Duncan French first. He's the VP. And then Bo hit me up on Twitter. And I was like, man, I'm in Vegas. I might as well just come over and check you guys out. And they were very, accepting of me coming through and showing me everything pretty much, which was really cool, man. They opened the doors up where people like he's going to say, but people think that it's a closed door policy type thing. And actually, to be honest, they're very, accepting of people coming in and checking the place out, especially professionals and coaches that train, train UFC fighters, so it's really cool that they're opening the doors to actually show these coaches and fighters that it's open for everybody, but it was interesting, man. It was very high tech. You have a lot of good, technology in there. They have a lot of good resources for the fighters. I would say,
you
physical therapy.
Are a guy. You're at one of the best, if not the best, gym in the game. I mean, and this is not to put ATT down, but would you say, because of what you just mentioned, the resources, is the institute almost on a next level because they have the billions behind them in the UFC? Is it crazy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's because of that, but it's good because they understand what they're trying to accomplish, where the future lies of the sport, and we're trying to make steps in the right direction to make it a legit sport, like the NFL, like the NHL, where they have these means to do higher level of technology to enhance the abilities of the fighter athlete. So it's really cool. It's kind of like a step in the future, and we'll see how it goes. Going further, but I think it was a good look.
As always, if you dig this episode with Bo, then go check out our previous shows with our fantastic other strength and conditioning coach guests and trainers like Tony Ricci, Joe DeFranco, Dan Garner, Zach Evanesh, by finding our pages on iTunes, Spotify, Player FM, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, and on YouTube. Please share, comment, leave us some ratings on those services. Also, a couple of important mentions. Please go and vote for Phil for the World MMA Trainer of the Year Award at worldmmaawards.com, or find the specific page, because this is on Fighters Only Mag. It's you can look on their website. There's a page. There's a specific part where you can vote for World MMA Awards, and let's get out the vote. Let's get hashtag Vote Daru for this Trainer of the Year Award. I mean, it's well deserved. Our boy needs to win. I'm also pleased to mention we hit a few cool milestones recently. We have surpassed 20,000 total downloads since we started the show a year ago. Separate from that, we have also surpassed 2,000 plays on SoundCloud, 1,000 plus listens on Spotify since we debuted on that servers in December. Just want to thank, take this moment to thank all of you listening out there. We really, really appreciate it. We really appreciate you guys when we're happy to make content you enjoy. And for anybody interested in sponsorship for the show, find us on Facebook or at the Fight Strength Podcast, gmail.com. So Phil, Year one of the Fight Strength podcast, almost the year anniversary. June 9th is when we did the first episode. It's in the books. What are your thoughts on working with just an astoundingly talented and entertaining individual like myself for a year?
It has been interesting. I'm gonna tell you the truth, man. Sometimes I understand where you're coming from, and then sometimes I'm like, I'm gonna fuck this guy up. I'm gonna fuck. Nah, I'm just playing. I love you, man. No, it's been cool, man. It's been a fun ride. I'm liking where we're headed, and I think that we can make it happen a little bit more. Obviously, both of our careers are taking off, and it's good to see that you're doing your thing, and we have a lot of things that we're doing on top of this, and we're just trying to put out as quality content for people so that they can understand what we're trying to accomplish. But at the same time, we have our own things that we have to do, and it makes sense. Now, that being said, I would like to have more sponsors. So if you have a company that you actually want us to to promote, hit us up, man. We'll be glad to shout you guys out and get you guys some more looks. So it'll be good. But other than that, man, I'm feeling it. I like it a lot. It's a fun ride.
I mean, year one, you summed it up perfectly. It's been interesting. It's been a learning experience, especially from my point of view, and learning what you do and your expertise and all the strength and conditioning aspect of the sport. I really didn't understand how important it is, how vital it is. I've had some great moments being able to talk to some of the best fighters in the world, like Joanna and Jacek and Tish Torres, Tyron Woodley, and I've enjoyed the experience with you, and I'm proud to call you a friend of mine, and I'm looking forward to more things coming up.
Yeah, for sure, man. You're the man. I do appreciate you and everything you do with all the scripts and giving me such good intros all the time. I love that. So I'm pretty sure nobody's giving me intros like you, bro. So I'm happy with it.
I mean, and before we get on to Bo, all the mentions out of the way, I mean, do you have anything coming up? What's the things coming up in the next month or so in terms of seminars?
Yeah, I got Poland in a couple weeks, so that's the Combat Sports Performance Summit in Yolts, Poland, and then also I think I'm saying that right, Uts or something. LODZ. Don't get mad at me, Polish people. I apologize. I love you, but I don't speak Polish, so I'm sorry. I'll be going there though. It's LODZ. So I'll be out there at the Combat Sports Performance Summit.
So you'll be there with like the book, like trying to say words to them, and like you want to ask, "Wait, Jim," and you're trying to see how it works out.
Negative. I'll be having a translator. We'll be good to go.
Oh wow! See, this is how this is the level when you've succeeded, when you're one getting free coffees at Starbucks, and two you have your own translator. That is the next level of success right there.
Next level. And I think I'm riding business class, so
boom. Extra leg. I mean, you do have them thickum thighs, so you need that extra leg room.
I do need that. I think either that, and then it's gonna get down to me just having to ride private because I don't wanna put my seat up. I'm done.
Fair enough. So what after Poland? Anything else in what do you got in July and August?
Yeah. Well, July I'll be in the States in the beginning of July. I also have to go to the awards in Vegas, and then later in July I'll be doing a 2-city tour in Australia. So we're going to Sydney and Melbourne at the end of July, and then in August I'll go back to I'm going to Canada in August, and then probably do something in Arizona. And then September, I will be in Russia again, in Chechnya. And then also I have to go to St. Petersburg and Moscow to do something out there. And then October, I'm going to Singapore. So that's going to be fun. And then in November, I might be coming out to London finally. So that's going to be good too. So be on the lookout for that. I'll make sure I get all the dates and everything, coordinated there, and I'll have it on my social media when it's available.
All right, fair enough. It is now guest time. This week we have the pleasure of bringing on the Director of Strength and Conditioning for the UFC Performance Institute, a facility that is quickly growing in relevancy for the company. During his career, he has developed training programs for NCAA champions and Olympians in a plethora of different sports and disciplines. He also takes part in many speaking engagements around the world as he conveys his methods to audiences. That man is Bo Sandoval. Bo, thank you so much for coming on the show with us this week.
Man, thank you for that warm welcome, Jason. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
All right, Bo. So let's start with your background. You know, how you got started in strength and conditioning, and what actually led you to the job you have with the UFC.
I started out my undergrad at Northwestern State, Louisiana. Got kind of granted some observation hours in the weight room there with Thad Livingston, and just asked him like, hey, can I start observing and watching some of these other teams come through here? So he kind of let me do that. That's what introduced me to the profession. I had no idea you could be a strength coach for a living up until that point. Ended up transferring to Southern Mississippi. Softball coach took a job there and invited me to come down for the same kind of deal. She help me out with my undergrad tuition to be an equipment manager. And I said, yeah, as long as you can get my foot in the door with their strength and conditioning department when we get there. So she did that for me, and I had a great meeting with those guys. Ended up getting into an observation role there for my first semester. And those guys ended up giving me internship opportunities from then until I graduated. So for the next 3 years of my undergrad. And that's kind of what helped me earn my spot as a graduate assistant strength coach with those guys. So I did 2 years of grad school in the ex-phys and sports admin program at Southern Miss. And then after that, I dove right into the full-time rigors of a strength and conditioning coach.
Man, it sounds like you've been at it for a while, man. I think in '99, I don't even know if I was in middle school yet. I was not in middle school yet. But you know what? I'm not going to age you, Bo, because you're my boy. So I'm going to say you're just a seasoned veteran, man. You're a seasoned veteran in the game. Be happy to have you on, because a lot of the younger strength coaches in the game coming up, and they think that, you know, they're just going to skyrocket, you know, to, you know, training such high level fighters, athletes, whatever the case may be. You got to see, you know, the true journey that you're going to take in order to get to where you are at right now with the UFC. So people got to understand, man, it's not just, you know, an overnight success type of deal, where you have to understand, you know, there's levels to it, and it takes time to, you know, to develop that where you're at right now, you know, so that's cool.
No doubt about that.
Yeah. So let's backtrack a little bit, but I want to know exactly, you know, if fighters in the UFC want to start their training camp there, what's the steps that you take in order to facilitate the camp and for their physical preparation? So what are the basic steps that you would take if, let's say, you know, a fighter just wants to come out and do their whole camp there? Can you take us through that?
Sure. I'll take one step back. So there's how they initiate that contact, man, there's a spectrum. So sometimes that's initiated by a manager, sometimes a head coach, sometimes the athlete themselves. And then sometimes it's the whole team kind of gets together and we end up on a Skype call similar to this, or some sort of conference call, or they're all here in person. There's so many different ways that they reach out and make contact. So first thing we do is establish kind of who the point person is, who's going to be the best line of communication. And sometimes that's a head coach. Sometimes that's another discipline coach, maybe a striking coach or wrestling coach. And sometimes it's the athlete themselves, if they're a little bit more of the alpha and they've kind of got all the parts moving around them. So once we have an established line of communication, then we can dive into, okay, what is it going to take to build your ideal camp around you? So as you know, we have fighters all across this league that have just varying amounts of resources around them. We have some fighters that have everything and anything at their disposal. They've got a great group and a team around them. And then we have others that have literally nothing, and then everything in between. So when fighters reach out and they ask for assistance, or they want to tap into some of our resources, which they have full access to at no cost to them, the first thing we try to figure out is where can we plug and play and help, because we're a supportive role player. So where can we kind of plug gaps where they may be missing things? So once we have all the information involved, what their camp looks like, what their daily training regimen looks like. Are they one of those fighters that's driving all across town back and forth to get to different gyms, to get different types of training? Are they at an ATT where they've got everything under one roof? You know, what's their scenario? And then if it is one of those cases where they're going to come out here for 8 weeks and they're going to stay in Vegas for 8 weeks, what's the plan for facilitating the MMA training while they're here? So There's 2 major gyms that are within a mile away from our facility. Are they going to be training at one of those 2 gyms? Are they bringing coaches with them and training partners with them to where they're going to train out of our gym and host their own practices? So once we have a landscape of what that MMA approach looks like, now we can start to filter in processes around physical therapy, strength and conditioning, nutrition, and not to mention, the whole recovery piece and helping to strategize their week. Are they leaving gaps of time where there's opportunities to recover from one training session to another? Some, as you know, Phil, some fighters, they've got a pretty well orchestrated plan in their head, so that it's easy to kind of dive into that. And then there's others where they're scattered across the space. Oh, I want to work on this, and I want to work on these other 700 things, and we've got 7 weeks to do it. So helping them to prioritize what they want their training outcomes to be. So getting very objective on, okay, what are we prioritizing in terms of your MMA preparation and then the physical preparation that can accommodate that. And once we can prioritize things and be realistic about, which priorities we're gonna be able to tackle. Because, young ambitious fighters will be like, oh yeah, I want to get better at these 9 things. Like, look, man, we got 7 weeks. We may want to prioritize like 3 of them. It's realistic. Some of these other things may be long-term objectives. So now that's the breaking the ice. That's kind of getting into understanding who the fighter is, what their team's comprised of, what resources they have, and what their outcomes look like. Not to mention where they're at in their game. If it's UFC debut and they maybe have 6 other pro fights under their belt, or is it someone that's a veteran that's got 35 fights under their belt as a pro? So, once we dive into that, then I basically, as a strength and conditioning coach, I need to know one of 2 things off the jump. Are we in a mode to where we are at risk for making weight, number 1? So if we are, then we got to get into a strategy around compressing 8 weeks of training to where we can target and prioritize the weight cut. Or if it's someone that has not had a historical trouble with weight, and they're in a good position, they're within 10% at the start of camp, we're 8 or 10 weeks out, they're within 10% of their weigh-in weight, no problem. We can start to prioritize performance goals. It's very difficult if you're sitting 23% over your weigh-in weight, and you got a guy that's like, man, I want to increase my strength and power. That's tough when we've got to spend a lot of time, in a caloric deficit. We got to spend a lot of time in low energy states. So we try to prioritize first. Are we in a weight cutting mode, or are we in performance? So once we've identified that and we've come to an agreement with them and their fight team on understanding where we're at in that kind of crossroads, then we start to strategize our performance goals and then what we can actually fit into their training regimen. We have some fighters whose training regimen consists of upwards of like 12 to 14 training units per week. So those units represent either a practice or a conditioning session, an S&C session. 14 is on the high end, man. That's a ton. And if you compare, because, these guys, MMA, it's the decathlon of combat sports. They've got so many skills, so many disciplines that they have to be sharp at. It's very comparative to like a decathlon. You've got 10 events. They've got like 4 or 5 of them that they need to be specialists, 4 or 5 that are their strengths. They know they're going to score a lot of points in. And all the others, you just need to be around average or a little bit above if you want to be competitive in order to score a medal. So with these guys, same kind of thing. Like, we've got to juggle all these different skills. So if you got a guy who's younger on the totem pole or has less experience fighting, and he's got to spend a lot of time on skill acquisition with all these different disciplines, we tend to see 12 to 14 units of training per week. Whereas if we get a seasoned veteran, some of these guys that have got, already have 15 plus fights in the UFC, the trend that we're seeing is there's not as many of the very discipline-specific practices. Their practices are much more of a melting pot of skills. You may have like a wrestling practice, some kind of striking practice, and then maybe some sort of, whether it's a spar or an MMA, grappling sparring session, something along those lines. But you don't see as many individualized, okay, this is a Muay Thai session, this is my BJJ session, this is my wrestling session. So when their units are down lower to that, somewhere between 8 and 12 per week, that gives us more opportunities to prioritize some of the physical training. So we kind of get an idea of what does the congestion of training look like throughout the week. And then we start plugging and playing based on the priorities. Are we prioritizing their fitness goals? Are we prioritizing their strength and power goals? And how we identify those and help them kind of see is by objective assessments, which we have a battery of tests and assessments that we go through here with newcomers to PI. It's a good way to introduce them to the facility and see kind of what we're capable of, but also it just takes a lot of the guesswork out. We have fighters all the time like, oh, I think I'm pretty strong. And then we take them through a series of assessments. And we can either validate and say, yeah, man, you actually pound for pound, you're one of the top 5 strongest guys in your division. Or we can, hey, this is actually a weak point for you. So if the time frame is conducive and you you agree that you want to target this, we can actually spend some time and prioritize a strength and power test.
That's a good approach. I'm glad that you guys are taking the initiative to understand exactly what they need and when they need it from a physiological standpoint, especially when they start camp, because they don't know exactly what they truly need once it really starts. So that's good that you're keeping it all on paper and you have the means to do so. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's hard for them sometimes and I don't understand it totally, but it's hard for them sometimes to perceive, because if they just came out of a camp that went really well and the fight result was exactly what they wanted, and maybe they had 3 weeks of downtime in between before they started the next camp, but physiologically you don't know what kind of deterioration that they went through, but in their eyes, hey, camp just went great, I'm ready to go, like let's get into some really fancy high level stuff, and we may need to re-scratch the surface, get through a little bit of general prep before we get into some of those specific high-end alactic work or high-end metabolic work or some of the high-end strength and power work. So it just helps us keep it responsible, and just as much as we're trying to get them into the cage on weight, is getting them into the cage as close to 100% as possible, just feeling good and feeling confident when they step in there.
I mean, it's interesting that when you talk about the Institute, because in my naivete, I thought that like the Performance Institute was going to become sort of like American Top Team or Rufus Sport, but it seems like what you're telling us is that it's almost like a supportive thing. It can be whatever the fighter needs. So would you say like a fighter can bring his whole team? Could a fighter just come for a few weeks? Could a fighter just come by themselves, and the Performance Institute can become their new gym, and they could work out with the local gyms? Is that what the Institute is? It can be really whatever the fighter needs in any kind of various ways?
Yeah, Jason, that's a great point. I mean, we just had our 1-year anniversary. This is a very new concept for the company, and a lot of fighters and fight teams, unless they've been here and kind of dove into it, it's hard to perceive kind of what our purpose is and what we're trying to do for the fighters. I like to explain it as, man, we're like the ultimate corporate wellness program. So every fighter on our roster has access to this facility and to everything inside of it, including the personnel. So we are 100% supportive of those fighters, their fight teams, and their support staffs that we have around them. So we have, again, it's a spectrum. We have some fighters, they do come by themselves and they may be here for 2 days. They may get some diagnostic work done and some medical workups, and then we send them on their way, and then they go back and converse with their teams. And then maybe a week later, 2 weeks later, we have a coach call up and they want to follow up and then start to tap into more resources. Or vice versa, the other end of the spectrum, we have some fighters that have, like I said, a lot of resources around them. They'll bring out their coaches, they'll bring out their strength coach, they may bring a PT with them, training partners, and we not only facilitate what their requests are, but while their team is here, we facilitate, if their coaches want to have strategic meetings and talk shop, we host those sessions. We get around with our medical team, with our PTs, to connect with their PTs and their medical groups, because they can provide them with resources as well. I'll meet with S&C coaches. We kind of help strategize, but then also if there's some things that their strength coach can't facilitate, hey, coach, we want to get a VO2 max assessment. I want to see what this guy looks like on a step test. So we can see how he metabolizes energy at rest. How does he metabolize energy at the midway point? How does he metabolize energy at a maximum? Then we can facilitate and give them those data resources, so now they can be more strategic with their programming. So there's a spectrum on how it gets used. And up to this point, we've only had, I think we're close to 70% of our roster. You know, the roster bounces somewhere between 540 and 565 fighters worldwide. We've had about 70% of them through our doors so far in the first year. So the more they become aware and kind of tap into it, they start to figure out how to utilize it. And I would say it goes for the same with managers and coaches and supportive staff as well.
So, I mean, of course, you don't want to take away from another camp that's already said. But for all the fighters out there, I mean, I think we could all agree you want to get the best facilities, the best state of the art things that you can offer all the coaches and everything. So for a fighter that's maybe not a part of a big gym that has it all already, like an ATT, what makes the Performance Institute so different, so unique, so state of the art that a fighter, if they wanted to go there and make that their gym, what makes it different than just the regular gyms that most fighters will be training at right now?
I mean, again, all of those gyms are super individual. I'll use ATT as another example. You've got a handful of world-class coaches there in different disciplines. You've got S&C there. They have access to some medical groups there. Those fighters can tap into anything from massage resources and different types of recovery modalities that are close by. So that's a pretty tight-knit little fighting community that you have there. So for them, honestly, it's not all that different. The PI is not all that different. We may have access to some different technology and things like that, but a lot of those fighters, they have a lot of what they need right there under one roof. Whereas we've got, I'll throw out an example without dropping a name. We had a fighter come in 2 weeks ago from Maine, who's an up-and-comer that's got some talent. He's got some good things around him in terms of his MMA resources, but in terms of everything else, he's almost on his own. So he comes out, brings his coach with him, brings 2 training partners. We not only work with him to strategize his work, but his training partners get to participate in everything as well, because they're part of his team, right? And then we help facilitate when they go back. So he went back, he found a trainer in his local area. I started communicating with that gentleman and helping him facilitate programs. And that kind of transpired into that gentleman taking over full time. And so initially I kind of helped set up the programming, and then that turned in and evolved into him kind of grabbing the reins and really understanding the direction. And now that fighter's got some better, I wouldn't say it's a full package yet, but he's got some better resources now that are a little bit better equipped. So his next visit to the PI might be different. He may be coming now with a more like well-rounded team with some different ambitions and some better resources around him. So that's 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. One very, very limited resourced fighter compared to someone like an Amanda Nunes that comes out to the PI and she's got, tons of resources around her. So there is a lot of varying degrees of it. There's also, and it's got to be some initiative by the fighter, because, not all fighters do strength and conditioning, and not all fighters are religious about their ground game as they are their stand-up game, and others rely on their ground game more than, so they all prioritize different aspects of training differently. So for us, we have to be in a very reactive approach in terms of when they reach out to us. We have to get first, like I mentioned, that communication piece. We have to get an understanding on where their head's at and what they're trying to get done. And then we can help plug and play in terms of resources and how we can help supplement their training. And then along the way, there's education to kind of help them have some foresight and to better equip themselves to structure their training and to think about things like longevity and to think about things, like prioritizing mobility and warm-ups. I get this all the time. Fighters like, man, I spend more time warming up here than I ever have in my whole career. When the honest part is they've just never warmed up before.
Yeah.
So there's just so many varying degrees. Now, I will say this. We have some groups out there that do it very well, and it's evident when they come in. They've got a great system. They've got a great pedigree of success behind them. And we're not by the book of hey, if if it ain't broke, break it. If they've got a good thing going, we're also in a very unique situation where we have opportunities to learn from essentially 560 practitioners worldwide. So it's a nice seat to be sitting in terms of hearing a lot of different strategies on how to win. So that's a beneficial aspect for myself as well.
I have one more quick question, and then Phil, you can take it. Just I mean, you mentioned that for the roster of fighters, like 70% of them have been using it, and it's such a valuable facility to have and go to. Are there ever instances where you have two different fighters that are set to match up on a card that are working at the institute at the same time, and how do you handle it? Is it so fighter specific and the facility is so large that you can pretty much keep them completely separate without any issue, or are choices have to be made? Do fighters say, oh no, he's right now, I don't want to go? How does that work out for something like this where the entire roster has an option to use this place?
Woo, that's the top five toughest. That's the top five toughest hurdle that we deal with, no question. So in my strength and conditioning career, I've kind of got to dip my toes in it as early as 2000, and in terms of that is the most unique situation. In no other sporting venue, other than maybe USA Nationals for like wrestling, USA Nationals for boxing, have I seen two competitors that we've had our hands on going at it, together. So that happens frequently here. So first off, everything in terms of booking, we have a staff that's their whole job is the booking, and all that booking gets negotiated through the fight teams and our performance staff. So I'm going to throw that word spectrum out again. We have a spectrum of fighters that are ultra professional in terms of they're not going to fight for free. They're not going to get here and scrap with each other down in the weight room because they see each other. And some of them are super cordial, come up and hug each other, high five each other. They know, hey, this guy's got a session right now, because a lot of them will pass right through the weight room on their way to the cafe to go eat lunch. So they're pretty cordial about it. Now, we have become educated and very aware of the ones that just absolutely don't want to see each other. Yeah. And we know that they don't want to cross paths. So we're strategic about how we book them. If we've got, a pretty common one around here is, well, I won't throw any names out. We got a couple of them that are here local. They both train here full time. They're here all the time. And we know that they just don't care to be around each other. So we book them at opposite ends as best we can. Mm-hmm. They know that we're intentionally doing that. We have that discussion with them. So I'm like, hey, look, so-and-so's in here in the afternoon. Do you want to shoot for morning, or do we want to switch days or move things around if it's conducive with the training? And they appreciate that we try to do that. We want them to enjoy training. We want them to be able to focus on them. We don't want them to have to take focus away from what they're doing and what they're trying to do in their professional lives. Because some other cat in their division is walking through at the same time. So there is a lot of strategy around that. The other thing is our staff almost has to be sworn in terms of confidentiality around training. And that is something that I kind of myself personally, with our strength and conditioning staff and that department here, that's the first stake that gets stuck in the ground day one. First meeting we have, this is our resources, 100% individual to you. No one else will grab a hold of this information unless you deem it so. So if you want me to push this information to your strength coach in Coconut Creek, Florida, I'll definitely do it. But if you want no one to have this information and this is yours solely, then that's it. If you want the doors shut and the blinds down when you're in here training, no problem. You just say the word. Mm-hmm. So we're here to make it as ultimately they're not here to just come to Disney World. They're here to take care of their job and their livelihood. So we want to make that as comfortable as possible.
All right. Yeah. So Bo, man, I know you have limited time, so I want to go ahead and ask you this question before,
Yes,
we got to go. But in your opinion, from all your experience that you have, what are the major issues that you see in the world of MMA strength and conditioning, and what are the things that coaches or strength and conditioning coaches you see that are doing things wrong? What do you think is the most?
So I'm not going to totally overstep my boundaries here, because I've been about neck deep into this MMA world for going on 13 months now. So prior to that, being involved with international boxing, international wrestling, those are very different cultures,
Sure.
And then you get into team sports and all that those cultures are totally different. So once I started diving into this and getting to meet individuals like yourself that are highly influential, but then also meeting other individuals that are a little bit more reclusive, that kind of stick to their own and they're not as widely publicized. You start to get an idea of the spectrum of services that are out there. So in terms of right and wrong, I really try my best not to run around spouting out what's right and wrong, but I definitely have seen okay and better. So there are some places that do it okay, and there's some places that do it really well, and then there's some that do it just better. They're more refined. You can tell there's more experience in what they're delivering. But I would say in terms of the things that are problematic, I think culturally, there's two big issues that we're still running into with UFC fight cards, and that's people missing weight and things centered around injuries that particularly when it comes to catastrophic and very chronic overuse injuries. These are things that can be eliminated through better strategies around periodizing training. And periodizing training, as well as some preach it and know it, like yourself, PJ Nestler and some of those guys out on the West Coast. There's pockets of people up in the Midwest that do a great job with periodizing training and structuring training. But some of them are doing it on their own. So you have an S&C coach who's periodizing training inside of a very unperiodized training camp. So once that happens, there's no more periodization. If the S&C work is like 15% of the overall work of the fight camp, and the fight camp is non-periodized, there's no periodization. It's out the window. So culturally, we have, I would say, a small percentage, maybe 15-ish, 20% worldwide that truly periodize a training camp. And then the others, man, they're trying to maximize that 8 or 10 weeks as much as they can. They're trying to cram as many skills in as they can. They're trying to cram as many sparring sessions, as many high-intensity sessions as they can. And Phil, I know you know the notorious camps because you got fighters that come from those camps that come to ATT to escape some of those camps. That's all I hear. And I always ask one common question when they come to us. Like when we start talking about planning and we're organizing a fight camp, first thing I ask them, okay, ex-fighter, you've got 30 fights under your belt. How many times have you stepped into the cage? And I'm not talking about getting hyped underneath the lights and excited about a debut in a new organization or anything like that. How many times physically have you stepped into the cage and felt like, wow, you know what? I am 100% physically right now. I have 100% confidence in my muscular recovery. I have 100% confidence in the ability of my heart and lungs. And there's nothing for me to stress about. I can clearly just think about my strategy and my game. I'm not tired from my cut. I'm not exhausted because of the stress that comes along with that cut and making that deadline. I always ask that question. And of every fighter, the answers are the same. They're always like, 3 times, 2 times. Some are 1 time. Some say never. I've had a couple of fighters that have over 30 fights that have never felt 100% inside the cage. Now, I'm not saying that is the ultimate standard. That's like, look, we're not doing it right unless we get every fighter inside the cage feeling 100%. They fight for a living. There's going to be bumps and bruises that they're going to drag into that cage. But it should not be 2. It shouldn't be 3. They should definitely have, I would say, I like to describe it as better experiences. They should have better experiences going inside that cage. Now, some of that is simple. Some of that is because they're not spending any time doing recovery. Okay, that's easy. Plug in, some systematic recovery. Some of them literally, that's all they're missing. Others, it's like, oh yeah, coach, I spar 4 times a week. Well, we have so much history in the sport now. We have 25 years in the UFC, and then Vale Tudo and other forms of MMA have been around longer than that. We have guys and head coaches that have been around that know that you don't necessarily, especially once you're in the 8-week meat of it, you may not need to spar 4 times a week. There are other ways to get your skills in. There's other ways to get your high intensity work in. But man, we still have guys that come through these doors that tell us they spar every day of the week. They spar every day that they're training. So to me, that just goes back to, okay, you're not really prioritizing training and recovering. One thing that I try not to preach too much, but one thing that I always do if I get into that preach mode is all we do is supply stimulus. Myself, I heard Dan Garner say this too, Phil, when we were at the Muscle Farm headquarters. All we do is we supply a demand. That's it, right? And then in terms of the recovery from it, in terms of the adaptation, that doesn't occur till later. You got to sleep and you got to eat and you got to give your body a chance to rest before you recover from any of that. So we can bash them as much as we want physically. We can cause an energy demand. We can diminish energy, but nothing gets replenished. There's no super compensation until they recover from it. So that all comes hand in hand with just a solid periodized plan. So now, like I said before, we do have some pockets of some professionals worldwide that do this very well. It's just a super small percentage right now. So culturally, we just have a lot to do in terms of getting more camps, more coaches, more fighters educated in terms of how they manage themselves, and not even only in camp, but out of camp as well. There's a stigma with this sport in terms of the fight camps. A lot of fighters, you get paid to fight, so that when you're in fight camp, essentially that's what you're getting paid for. So then when they're out of fight camp, we still have a mentality where some fighters, I'm off. I'm off. They don't all necessarily have a 52-week-a-year professional athlete mindset. They have an 8-week at a time athlete mindset. And so, that doesn't mean you have to train 52 weeks. But if you look at other sports as examples, team sports, other individual sports, they have their off times, they got their holidays, they got their vacations with their families, but then you're into some kind of off-season training. You're into some kind of periodized off-camp training. And so that gets highly neglected a lot still in this sports. I would say if there's anything that professionals like ourselves need to try to influence long-term over time, it's the cultures around being a full-time professional athlete, 52 weeks out of the year, and then also prioritizing, planning, periodizing of the camp.
Yeah. Well, knowing you for the time I've known you, that's probably the quintessential answer that I was expecting. Thank you, Bo. I appreciate that. But that is true, man. We don't put a lot of emphasis on periodization, and another thing is we don't coordinate and communicate with skills coaches enough. And that's one thing that you can, do if you don't work. Like for me, I can do that because I work in-house with all my skills coaches, but you got to reach out to these guys as coaches, if you don't work with them. So that's one thing I would say, but I appreciate that, Bo.
Hey, Phil, that's a great point. And the other thing is, and I'm going to say this because I know you got a lot of great listeners in the strength and conditioning world that are going to listen to this. I hear all the time about guys, especially strength coaches, that complain like, oh, well, my skills coach is doing this, my skills coach is doing that. So the first question I ask is, well, how many conversations did you have with them? And they're like, oh, well, I can't talk to that guy. I can't. That guy's, he's not going to listen to me. And I'm like, look, man, at some point, it's up to the strength coach to hustle a little bit and get in front of those coaches and to chat with them and gain their trust. Not to mention to show them that you're not the S&C coach is not taking over anything. The S&C coach wants to play a supportive role to help them accomplish their mission, whatever that mission is for that training camp. So it's a huge responsibility on the strength coaches, PTs, the support staff to get in front of those coaches and be supportive for show them that they can help.
Yeah, for sure, man. So I know that you got to go. Jason, you have any other short questions that we can get through, if that's ever possible?
Yeah, you can give a quick answer to a couple of these. First, any of the all the athletes that go to the Performance Institute, they have to be UFC contracted athletes, right? No, you can't be anything other than.
Unless they're participating in a camp for a contracted fighter. So we have other fighters from other organizations. They might be here training with one of the fighters that's here doing their camp. Absolutely, they're welcome. Again, we want that fighter to have everything that they need while they're here. So, but yeah, that would be the only instance.
Now, there's two areas of the gym that stuck out to me: the recovery zone that has like a low-level laser light therapy pod, and the altitude chamber. Can you just give like a quick summation of what those are and what they, why they're so useful, if you can?
Sure. Yeah. So the laser light therapy pod, that one's quick. So a lot of essentially what low-level infrared light. It causes vasodilation. So it's an anti-inflammatory tool. So as you know, Phil's a former fighter. I mean, you're dealing with inflammation daily. That's all you guys do. You accumulate lactic acid. Sometimes you buffer it. The rest of it, you're swimming around in it. Joints get inflamed, muscles get inflamed. That's just part of it. Well, a lot of times, traditionally, hot tubbing helps to reduce and relax, a lot of that. But there's a lot of exhaustive byproducts that come out of getting in a hot tub, getting in the steam, getting in the sauna. So the low level infrared light can cause some of that vasodilation, and it can cause that anti-inflammatory effect without causing a lot of the heat exhaustive byproducts. So if, let's say, a fighter's got another session, they just did a morning session, they got another one at 4 p.m. or something like that, and they wanted to do some anti-inflammatory recovery, that could be a good option in between those sessions to where they don't get that exhaustive effect from heat that comes along with it. So that can be a tool for that. It's also pretty quick. The shortest session's about 12 minutes. We don't recommend they stay in there any longer than 20 minutes. So it can be a good option for some of them. Now, in terms of the hypoxic chamber, we do have the ability to create a hypoxic environment. We can put them up to 22,000 feet in there. Not that we ever have. That's, you're talking about peaking Mount Everest at that altitude. So, but we have had some fight cards. Just in the fall, we had a fight card in Mexico City. They're at about 8,500 feet. So we had a few, I want to say, a handful of fighters that were our main and co-main eventers for that fight that came through, and they spent like the last 3 weeks leading up to their travel time. So they were just doing some supplemental acclimation, just so the acclimating once they got there was a little bit watered down. So for a couple of them, we cleared that room out. We threw some mats in there so they could grapple. We threw a bag in there so they could do some striking. Their coach was holding mitts for them in there. So we just gave them a hypoxic environment to be able to do some of the normal skills work that they were doing. And then we also, of course, you can use treadmills and rowers and ski ergs and everything else in there, whatever we can drag in there for them that they'd want to use to supplement some of their cardiovascular work in a hypoxic environment. So it can be good to help water down, acute hypoxia like that can help with acclimating. If you're looking for long-term benefits of high altitude training, the ideal scenario would be to live high and train low, which we can't really simulate that here. But in terms of some supplemental hypoxic environment, that's essentially what they can use that for.
And also, there's the recovery or the therapy suite is in conjunction with the hospitals for special surgery, I think. Does that have like a full medical staff where somebody gets injured in the facility, they can get checked out real quick and maybe not even have to go to hospital, or major things you got to go to hospital?
So it depends. Obviously, like, we don't do surgeries and things like that here, but HSS provides us essentially a worldwide network of orthopedics and different surgeons, all different disciplines that we have access to, not only here, but, we host events all over the world. So when we see catastrophic injuries in Asia or in Eastern Europe or in South America, we have access to those docs there. Now, we usually always have a UFC doc there as well, because we have someone that's in a liaison, but we always have that partnership with HSS can supplement some of those, especially some of those major medical services. So yeah, that's a huge resource for a sport that is so widespread. Because obviously, if our partnership was with, the Summerlin Hospital here in Vegas, we'd be pretty limited when it comes down to hosting fights in New York City. And now we need to get access to an orthopedic because someone, snapped their fib checking a low kick.
All right, final question. Thank you so much for your valuable time. Appreciate it. In your time dealing with this elite level athletes of the UFC, have you any freakish athletes stand out to you that you can mention that's worthwhile?
So first off, I'm an S&C coach by passion, and all of these guys and gals have something to offer that's just amazing. First off, their mentality around what they do. There's so many different reasons for why fighters fight. They come from different walks of life, and I love that. That's what makes it entertaining, and that's what drives my passion as a coach. You got one fighter that comes in because they just genuinely like punching people in the face, and then you have another fighter that comes in because they're just extremely competitive. They may not like fighting all that much, but they're good at it, and they love winning more than anything, and that's their driver. We have other fighters that come in because they were bullied as a kid, and this is their release. This is what's keeping them out of jail. So there's such a great appreciation for all those things. So The other thing is we have athletes that are super high skilled, and that's why they're exciting to see. We have other athletes that may not be as highly skilled, but they're freakish athletes, and that's why they're exciting to see. So, you know, when you talk about like really athletic, freaky kind of guys, I mean, guys like Kevin Lee, guys like Francis Ngannou, those athletes they've got some special stuff running through their blood. And I'm not talking about supplemental things their parents have given them that allow them to recover faster. They carry muscle. They're on one end of the spectrum of super high power or super endured, or they're just well-rounded. You know, we have female fighters coming through like Sarah McMahon and Claudia Gadella, Ioane Jędrzejczyk, some of these athletes that just have ridiculous gas tanks, and their attributes cross the span. I mean, they in terms of some of them buffer lactic acid freakier than anyone I've ever seen. Some of them accumulate lactic acid, and they're so much more anaerobic and freakier than anyone I've ever seen. There's others that have, Brandon Moreno has an unbelievable amount of relative strength for such a tiny guy. So the guy pulled like 5 times his body mass on an isometric mid-thigh pull. So that's a dude that, you know, strength training is fairly new to him.
Wow.
So, you know, some of these athletes are extremely talented in terms of their physical attributes. But what I try to describe it to people, man, it's like Christmas here. I mean, you never know. They're like Christmas presents. You don't really know what you're going to get until you unwrap the package and kind of see what's inside.
All right, so that's pretty much it. Before we go, let the people out there know your social, your Twitter, your Instagram, your Facebook, any website you want to promote, anybody that can follow you and see the valuable, great work that you're out there doing.
Yeah, absolutely. For one, our welcome mat's always open. I know Phil's been out, but anyone that ever wants to visit or come by the PI, we're in Las Vegas, Nevada. And so we host, you know, strength coaches. There's different of all walks of life come through and visit. I just want to throw that out there because some places think that, you know, it's closed door and it's private, but we like to throw that welcome mat out, collaborate with as many professionals as we can. So that's always there. My Instagram is bo.sandoval. My Twitter is @OlyStrength, OLY Strength. Definitely, you can shoot me a message at any time. I'll always get back to you. Sometimes more delayed than others, but I'll definitely get back to you.
All right, Phil, give me your social as always.
Twitter and Instagram @Daru Strong, and the website darustrong.com.
For me, Jericho and Vendetta on Instagram, Cheap Seats Chat on Twitter. Remember, follow us, Fight Strength _ and on Facebook. Thank you so much, Bo Sandoval, for coming on this week. Really appreciate it. He's Phil Daru. I am Jason Burgos. That is episode 39 of the Fight Strength Podcast. Bye-bye.